Alright, so some people have been asking me about my new forest technique that they saw on my most recent map. And I'll give you a sense of how I did that. It's actually pretty straightforward. I'll draw it much larger first so you can see what's going on, and then I'll draw it at the scale I usually draw it at. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of drawing these puffy shapes that are connected and overlapping with each other. So on a much larger scale, it's something like this. And then I kind of double back, make one there, add one on top of that. Make sure they're different sizes and how they kind of overlap with each other. Start back over here to add some more on this side. You want to kind of go in random directions. That way you don't have these sort of like lines of them. So you have to be able to double back sometimes. And do one area before you do another. Keep these little sort of bush things different sized. You'll end up with something that looks like a forest pretty quickly. Now the trick is just to do this on a much smaller scale. So for the most part, this is all one line. Again, this is a new technique. I'm still getting better at it, but I think it already looks quite good. And it doesn't, it's not very difficult to do, although it is a little bit time consuming, right? It's kind of go back and forth on this for a while. And the impression is that each of these little bunches is a tree, which isn't exactly what I want, because obviously trees would be much smaller than this at this scale if this was a mountain range. But it looks a whole lot more dense than the forest techniques that I've shown before, which look like you're zoomed in much farther. So that's an advantage, mostly because the shapes are closer together, so it looks a little bit darker. And you can vary the density of it by making these things even smaller if you want. So for example, I made something that looked like this. You need a very thin pen to be able to do this properly. You can see how it looks like the forest is much smaller and farther away. It takes much longer than this. The smaller the little trees are, the longer it's going to take. But you can just kind of go back and forth and give your hand a rest every once in a while, and you'll probably be okay. Depends on how big you want your forest to be too. If you want really massive forests, this is going to take you a while. But the effect, I think, is pretty well worth it. So those are some different examples of forests at different scales. And again, you can vary the density of the forest and how zoomed in you appear to be by making the trees apparently larger and smaller. It's all one line just sort of looping back and forth on itself. I'm not making individual shapes and putting them together. The thing with doing that is you can do that, but it requires you taking your pen off of your page and putting it back down again and making different shapes, which takes a little bit longer. That's it.